Mark thought he buried his past. 5 years ago, he made a terrible mistake that resulted in him spending 6 months in prison. Once he got out, Mark decided to start over. He moved to another city and changed his phone number. He even started going by a different name. Mark didn't want anything to do with his old life anymore. For the most part, Mark managed to start fresh. But there was one thing he couldn't change. Every time Mark went to sleep, he had nightmares about the incident that landed him in jail. It always felt like he was reliving the moment he made the biggest mistake of his life. And every time he woke up from the nightmare, he would find himself sweating and gasping for air. The nightmares were relentless. They followed him everywhere he went. The only thing that gave Mark any sort of peace of mind was the fact that nobody from his past seemed to have found him. He figured they all hated him anyway, so why would they bother looking for him? Well, it turns out some people do look for you when you try to bury your past. One night, Mark was awoken from his sleep by a loud knock at the door. When he opened the door, he saw a man standing on his porch with a suitcase. Mark asked the man what he wanted, but the guy just stared at him awkwardly. Then the stranger said, "You must be someone important." Confused, Mark told the man he was wrong. But before he could close the door, the stranger pushed his way inside. "I know you," he said. "You're the guy I'm looking for." Mark immediately slammed the door shut and locked it. But then the stranger started banging on the door and screaming, "Open up! I know you're in there." Startled, Mark called the police. When they arrived, the officers found the stranger sitting on Mark's front steps with a bloody head wound. He had apparently hit his head on the concrete when Mark's neighbor confronted him and knocked him out. Mark told the police he had no idea who the man was or how he knew his address. The cops searched the house but could unfind anything that would help them figure out what had happened. Eventually, they left Mark alone again. As soon as they were gone, Mark looked through the window and saw the stranger getting into an ambulance. Before he disappeared from sight, he turned his head and looked directly at Mark. That gave Mark goosebumps. How did this guy know him? And if he knew him, why didn't he recognize Mark? What did he want from him? Mark decided not to think about it too much. Instead, he poured himself a glass of wine and went back to watching TV. But the rest of the evening was ruined for him because now he kept thinking about the stranger. Who was he? Why did he know Mark's address? Why did he look at him like that before he got into the ambulance? Mark tried to distract himself, but he couldn't help but feel uneasy. So he got into bed early and hoped that putting his mind off of things would make him fall asleep faster. And for a while, it worked. But then he had a nightmare about the stranger breaking into his house and stabbing him over and over again. When Mark woke up from the dream, his heart was beating fast. It was clearly just a dream. But after everything that happened earlier that day, he couldn't shake this feeling that something bad was about to happen. He tried to tell himself it was silly, but his gut was telling him to call the police, so he picked up his phone and dialed 911. When the police arrived, he explained to them about his dream. The officers listened patiently, but they told him they couldn't do anything about it. He understood that, but he still couldn't shake this feeling that something bad was about to happen. So, he asked the police to stay around until morning just in case. To his surprise, they agreed to do it. He was very grateful for that, and for a while, everything was fine. The police watched TV, and Mark tried to go back to sleep. But right before sunrise, Mark was awoken by a loud crash. He and the officers rushed to the window to see what had happened. Outside, they saw a black SUV smashed into Mark's front gate. "The hell?" Mark exclaimed. The officers told him to stay behind while they went outside to check it out. One of them shined his flashlight around and said, "Hello, is anyone there?" Just then, the back door opened and the stranger from before stumbled out. He was holding a crowbar and his eyes were filled with rage. "You won't get away that easily," he yelled. The officer immediately drew his weapon and told the man to drop the crowbar. "Don't move or I'll shoot," he said. But the stranger didn't listen. He swung the crowbar at the officer, but he dodged it. Soon as he did that, the other cop shot the man. The stranger screamed and dropped the crowbar. He fell to the ground, and the police rushed over to him. They handcuffed him and turned him over. As it turned out, he had a bullet wound in his stomach. Despite the pain, he spat at the cops and cursed at them. "You don't know what you're doing," he shouted. "You're gonna regret this." Then he lost consciousness. Mark couldn't believe what he had just seen. He was terrified and confused. Why was the stranger trying to break into his house? Did he know something about Mark's past? And why did he attack the police? Mark was too afraid to ask questions. He didn't want to know the answers. The police took the injured man away in an ambulance. At first, they asked Mark if he wanted to go with them to the station, but he declined. He didn't want to get involved. Still, the police stayed in Mark's house until sunrise. When they finally left, Mark noticed something. On the way out, one of the officers picked up the crowbar that the stranger had used to smash his way in. At first, Mark thought nothing of it. But later that morning, he got a call from the police station. A woman picked up and asked him, "Hey, Mark, is this you?" Confused. Mark asked her what she was talking about. "I found this crowbar in our property room, and I think it might be yours," she said. "Do you recognize it?" Mark hesitated, but he had no choice but to come clean. "Yeah, I think I dropped it outside when I moved in," he said. "Can I come pick it up?" "Sure," she replied. "Just come on down." Mark felt a chill down his spine. Why was this woman asking him about the crowbar? Was she suspecting that he had something to do with the stranger? He tried to shake off these thoughts and went to the police station. The woman gave him the crowbar and he thanked her. Then he quickly left the building. When he got home, he threw the crowbar in the trash. He didn't want to have any more contact with the police. It was a horrible experience. But now it was over. Or so he thought. That afternoon, Mark was watching TV when he heard a loud crash. He went to the window and saw two men rummaging through his neighbor's shed. They were young, maybe in their early 20s, and both of them were carrying weapons. One of them had a crowbar, which looked awfully familiar, and the other had a baseball bat. Mark watched in disbelief as the men stole several items from the shed. Then they fled the scene. He couldn't just sit back and watch them get away with it, so he called the police. When the officers arrived, Mark told them what had happened, but they didn't seem to care. "It's just a bunch of kids horsing around," one of them said. "They probably stole some beer or something." Mark shook his head. "No, those guys had weapons. And besides, stealing is still a crime, isn't it?" The officer sighed. "Look, kid, we've got bigger fish to fry. If you want to file a police report, you can come down to the station and do it. But I wouldn't waste my time if I were you." Mark was outraged. These guys just committed a crime, and the police weren't doing anything about it. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. He grabbed the crowbar from his shed and went looking for the thieves. He was furious, and he wasn't afraid to use the crowbar against them. But when he found them, he realized he didn't want to hurt them. He also realized he had no idea where to find them. All he could do was wait, and that's exactly what he did. He waited outside his house, hoping he'd be able to scare the men away. But it turned out the opposite happened. The men came back to Mark's house later that night, and he scared them away again. This time, they ran into the woods behind his house. Called the police again, but they didn't come. He knew they wouldn't, so he didn't even bother calling them back. Frustrated, Mark went back inside. He looked out the window and saw the men running through the woods. Suddenly, one of them tripped and fell. He looked like he had twisted his ankle. The other guy stopped and looked around. When he saw Mark looking at him through the window, he raised his middle finger and screamed, "Screw you!" Mark had had enough. He put on his shoes and went outside. He had to do something. He walked up to the edge of the woods and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" There was no reply. So Mark stepped into the trees and started walking. After a while, he found the men. The one with the injured ankle was sitting on a log, and the other was trying to tie his shoe. "Are you sure you're okay?" Mark asked. The man with the injured ankle nodded. "Yeah, I twisted it a bit," he said. "That's all." Mark wanted to help, but he didn't know how. So he sat down on a log nearby and waited. About half an hour later, the man with the injured ankle said, "Thanks for staying with me. I really appreciate it." "No problem," Mark replied. "Just let me know if you need anything." The men stayed in the woods for a few hours. When the sun started coming up, Mark helped them get out, okay? They were scared of the police, so Mark offered to walk them to a taxi. On the way, the man with the injured ankle asked Mark, "Do you know how to get to the nearest hospital?" "Yeah, sure," Mark replied. "Why don't you go there and get your ankle checked out?" The man smiled. "Thanks for the help, man. You're a real lifesaver." Mark blushed and looked away. He was surprised by his own kindness. After all, these men had threatened him and stolen from his neighbor. When they got to the road, Mark stopped. He knew he had to say goodbye. "Well, here we are," he said. "Good luck with everything." The man with the injured ankle reached out and shook Mark's hand. "Thanks for everything, Mark," he said. "I owe you one." Mark waved as the men got into the cab. Then he turned around and headed back to his house. He was exhausted, but he couldn't help but feel good about himself. He had helped someone in need, even though they had threatened him and stolen from his neighbor. As he walked, Mark couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold for him. Would he ever be able to forget about his past? Or would he be haunted by it forever? Only time would tell.